August 5th, 1966, Beijing. A teenage girl named Song Binbin stands on a stage in Tiananmen Square in front of 1 million people. She's 17 years old, a high school student, and in her hands, she holds a small red book barely larger than her palm. Mao Zedong, the chairman of the Communist Party of China, stands beside her. He's 72 years old, the absolute ruler of nearly 1 billion people, the man who controls the largest population on Earth. And he asks this teenage girl to do something that will change everything. He asks her to give him a new name. She pins a red armband on his sleeve. The armband reads, Red Guard, Hong Weibing. And then, in front of the million assembled people, in front of cameras broadcasting across China, this 17-year-old girl renames the most powerful man in the world. She calls him Tong Mao, Mao the Violent, Mao the Militant. And he smiles. He accepts it. He embraces it. And in that moment, Mao unleashes something that will kill more people than Hitler and Stalin combined. Something that will destroy 5,000 years of Chinese civilization in less than a decade. Something that will turn children against parents, students against teachers, neighbors against neighbors, until the entire nation becomes a writhing mass of mutual destruction, all in the name of ideological purity. What happens next is not war, it's not invasion, it's not even traditional dictatorship. It's something far more terrifying, voluntary mass psychosis, the complete inversion of every social bond, every family tie, every human relationship, all orchestrated by one man using one weapon. That weapon is not guns, it's not secret police, it's not even propaganda in the traditional sense. It's a book, a small red book, 427 pages, simple quotations, banal phrases about revolution and class struggle, nothing that seems on the surface capable of destroying a civilization. But by the time the chaos ends 10 years later, somewhere between 40 and 80 million people will be dead. The exact number is unknown because the Chinese government has never fully disclosed it, has never fully acknowledged it, has never fully accounted for what Mao did to his own people. But conservative estimates put the death toll at 45 million. More radical estimates reach 80 million. To put that in perspective, that's more than every person who died in World War II. More than the Holocaust, the Soviet gulags, and the Nazi death camps combined. And it all happened in one country, orchestrated by one man, enabled by one book. This is not the story you think it is. This is not about a dictator who ruled through terror, though there was plenty of terror. This is not about a propaganda machine that brainwashed people, though there was propaganda. This is about something far more sophisticated and far more disturbing. Mao discovered something that neither Hitler nor Stalin fully understood. The most effective form of control is not fear of authority. It's fear of each other. The most effective form of surveillance is not secret police. It's your neighbors, your colleagues, your children. The most effective form of propaganda is not what the state tells you. It's what you tell yourself to prove your loyalty is greater than everyone else's. Mao didn't need to arrest everyone. He made everyone arrest each other. He didn't need to silence dissent. He made dissent impossible by making everyone compete to be the most loyal, the most revolutionary, the most willing to destroy anyone who seemed less pure. He didn't need to destroy his enemies. He made his enemies destroy themselves, each other, and everything they'd ever built, all while believing they were saving China. And the mechanism for all of this, the trigger that activated this voluntary self-destruction, was a book small enough to fit in your pocket. A book so simple a child could read it. A book that became the second most published book in human history, with over 1 billion copies printed. A book that millions of people carried everywhere, memorized completely, quoted constantly, waved in the air during struggle sessions where human beings were tortured and murdered for ideological impurity. Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. The Little Red Book. And it murdered more people than any other book ever written. Let me show you how. In our previous videos, we examined how Hitler used a single phrase to transform suffering into rage and focus, that rage on external enemies. We saw how Stalin used randomized terror and forced complicity to make an entire nation its own prison guard. We dissected how Goebbels used film to dehumanize Jews and prepare Germany for genocide. But Mao's method was different, more subtle, more total, more sustainable. Because Mao understood something profound about human psychology. People will do more to prove their virtue than they'll ever do out of fear. People will be more vicious in demonstrating loyalty than any secret police could force them to be. People will police themselves more thoroughly than any surveillance state could ever achieve. Mao weaponized virtue. He weaponized loyalty. He weaponized revolutionary purity. And he did it by creating a system where there was no maximum loyalty, only insufficient loyalty, where no matter how much you'd sacrificed, someone else could always accuse you of not sacrificing enough, where the only defense against being purged was to purge someone else first, where the only way to prove your innocence was to demonstrate someone else's guilt. This is the logic of the Cultural Revolution. This is the psychology of the Little Red Book, and this is why it killed more people than any other ideological movement in human history. But here's what should terrify you about this story. Mao's system didn't end when he died in 1976. It evolved, it modernized, it became more efficient. Because the Chinese Communist Party studied what worked and what didn't, refined the techniques, added technology, and created something even more sophisticated. The social credit system currently operating in China, where your behavior is constantly monitored, where your loyalty is quantified, where your access to jobs and travel and education depends on your ideological score, that's Mao's Little Red Book upgraded with artificial intelligence and facial recognition and big data analytics. The re-education camps in Xinjiang, where over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained for ideological correction, where they're forced to memorize Communist Party doctrine, where they're punished for religious practice or ethnic identity, that's Mao's struggle sessions systematized and industrialized. The way Chinese citizens report each other for insufficient patriotism, for criticism of the party, for consuming foreign media, that's Mao's system of mutual surveillance made seamless through smartphone apps and algorithmic enforcement. Mao is not history, Mao is now. His techniques are operational. His Little Red Book has been replaced by Little Red apps, but the psychology is identical. The mechanism is the same. The goal hasn't changed. Total ideological control through self-policing, peer pressure, and competitive loyalty demonstration. And it's spreading. Social credit systems are being explored in other countries. Algorithmic surveillance is becoming normalized globally. The idea that citizens should monitor and report each other's speech and behavior is becoming mainstream in democracies. Mao's methods are being adopted, adapted, and deployed worldwide, often by people who have no idea they're implementing Maoist control mechanisms. This is why you need to understand this story, not as history, as warning, as pattern recognition, as psychological self-defense. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how Mao's system worked, how a small book became a weapon of mass destruction, how voluntary participation became more effective than forced compliance, how ideological purity competitions became more deadly than secret police terror, how one man convinced 1 billion people to destroy their own civilization while believing they were perfecting it. And you'll recognize these patterns when you see them emerging in your own society, because they are emerging. In cancel culture dynamics, in purity spiral competitions, in algorithmic enforcement of ideological conformity, in peer-to-peer surveillance normalized through social media, in systems that reward reporting your neighbors, colleagues, or family members for wrongthink. Mao's Little Red Book killed 45 million people minimum, but the psychological weapons it contained are immortal. They're still being used, they're still working, and they'll keep working until enough people understand how they function and consciously refuse to participate. Let me take you to China in 1949 when Mao first took power. Let me show you how a man who just won a civil war and controlled the world's largest population still felt so insecure that he had to create a system of total control that would consume everything. Let me show you how he built a machine that turned parents into enemies of their children, teachers into targets of their students, and an entire civilization into a mass of people tearing each other apart to prove their loyalty. Let me show you how a book smaller than your hand became the most deadly weapon of the 20th century. And then let me show you where you're seeing the exact same weapon today. 1949, Mao Zedong has just won the Chinese Civil War. The Communist Party controls mainland China, nearly 550 million people. The nationalist government has fled to Taiwan. By every measure, Mao has achieved total victory. He is, without question, the undisputed leader of the world's most populous nation. And yet, Mao is paranoid. Deeply, fundamentally paranoid. Not without reason. He's lived through decades of civil war, Japanese invasion, internal party purges, assassination attempts, and betrayals. But his paranoia goes deeper than rational concern. Mao doesn't just want to rule China. He wants to transform China completely. He wants to erase 5,000 years of civilization and rebuild it according to his revolutionary vision. And he knows that's impossible as long as people maintain their old loyalties, old relationships, old ways of thinking. So Mao begins implementing policies designed not just to control people's actions, but to control their thoughts. To eliminate not just political opposition, but the very possibility of thinking differently from the party line. He studied Stalin. He knows how terror works. But he's also seen Stalin's limitations. Terror creates compliance, but it also creates resentment, hidden resistance, people who obey while secretly hating you. Mao wants something more total. He wants people who don't just obey. He wants people who genuinely believe, who enthusiastically enforce, who voluntarily police themselves and everyone around them. He wants to create what he calls new socialist man. Humans who've been so thoroughly conditioned that they can't conceive of thinking differently from the party. And he realizes that the key is not controlling people from above. It's making people control each other from below. It's creating a system where everyone is both enforcer and potential victim, where the only safety is in attacking others, where loyalty is demonstrated not through passive obedience but through active persecution of insufficient loyalty in others. This is the psychological architecture Mao begins building in the 1950s, and it has several key components that work together to create something unprecedented in history. Component 1. Ideological study as ritual. Beginning in the early 1950s, Mao mandates regular study sessions in every workplace, every school, every neighborhood, every organization. These aren't optional. Attendance is mandatory, and the content is always the same. Studying Mao's writings, memorizing his quotes, discussing how to apply his thought to every aspect of life. But here's the crucial innovation. These sessions aren't just about learning ideology, they're about performing ideology. You don't just passively absorb Mao's teachings, you have to actively demonstrate that you understand them better than everyone else in the room. You have to quote Mao more accurately, interpret him more correctly, apply his wisdom more cleverly to current situations. This creates competition, but not competition for resources or status in the traditional sense. Competition for who can demonstrate the most perfect ideological purity, who can be the most revolutionary, who can show the most absolute loyalty to Mao and his thought. And here's where it gets psychologically sophisticated. There's no objective measure of sufficient loyalty, no test you can pass that proves you're loyal enough, because someone can always claim you're not loyal enough. Someone can always interpret Mao's words in a way that makes your interpretation seem inadequate or suspicious. The bar for sufficient loyalty is infinite and constantly rising. This creates what psychologists call an approach-approach conflict, where you're constantly trying to prove something that can never be fully proven. It creates anxiety, hypervigilance, obsessive focus on demonstrating loyalty through increasingly extreme actions, because if you don't demonstrate extreme loyalty, someone else will demonstrate more extreme loyalty by accusing you of insufficient loyalty. Component 2. Self-criticism and public confession. But study sessions alone aren't enough, because people can fake enthusiasm. They can memorize quotes without believing them. They can perform loyalty while maintaining private doubts. So Mao implements something more insidious. Mandatory self-criticism sessions. Regularly scheduled meetings where everyone must publicly confess their ideological errors, their bourgeois thoughts, their insufficient revolutionary consciousness. Where you must identify your own failings before others identify them for you. This is psychological warfare at its most refined, because it forces you to internalize the party's judgment of you, to see yourself through the party's eyes, to preemptively punish yourself to avoid worse punishment from others. It makes you complicit in your own thought reform. And there's a trap built into the system. If you claim you have no errors to confess, that's proof of arrogance and insufficient self-awareness, which is itself an error. But if you confess errors too readily, that might suggest you're genuinely ideologically impure and need more severe correction. The only safe position is to confess moderate errors with extreme self-flagellation, demonstrating that you recognize your failings while also showing that you're capable of correcting them through greater devotion to Mao's thought. But even this isn't the full system, because self-criticism can still be performative. You can confess to minor errors while hiding major ones. You can go through the motions without genuine transformation. Component 3. Mutual accusation and struggle sessions. So Mao adds the final component. You don't just criticize yourself, you must criticize others. In fact, failing to criticize others is itself a serious political error. If you see someone displaying insufficient revolutionary consciousness and you don't report it, you're guilty of protecting class enemies. You're complicit in their crimes. You're demonstrating that your own loyalty is suspect. This creates a system of universal mutual surveillance. Everyone is watching everyone else for signs of ideological impurity. And not just watching, you must actively report it. You must accuse others to prove your own loyalty. The only defense against being accused is to accuse first. The only way to prove you're not protecting enemies is to expose enemies. This reaches its full horror in what become known as struggle sessions, public trials where accused individuals are forced to stand in front of crowds, often wearing humiliating signs while people take turns accusing them, insulting them, often physically attacking them. The accused must confess, must accept all accusations, must thank the people for helping correct their thinking. Resistance proves guilt. Self-defense proves arrogance. The only acceptable response is complete self-abasement and gratitude for the correction. And anyone in the crowd who doesn't participate enthusiastically becomes suspect themselves. If you don't shout accusations, if you don't show sufficient anger at the class enemy, if you show any sympathy for the person being struggled against, that marks you as potentially sympathetic to their crimes, as potentially harboring similar bourgeois thoughts, as someone who might need to be struggled against next. Do you see how total this is? Do you see how it makes resistance impossible? There's no solidarity among victims because victims are created by other victims trying to avoid being victimized. There's no private space for doubt because you must constantly perform absolute belief. There's no way to know who to trust because anyone you confide in might report you to save themselves. Component 4. The elevation of youth and the destruction of traditional authority. But Mao adds one more innovation that makes this system even more devastating. He elevates youth over age, children over parents, students over teachers, the young and zealous over the experienced and cautious. This inverts every traditional Chinese value. For thousands of years, Chinese culture had revered age, experience, wisdom, family loyalty. Children were taught to respect and obey their parents absolutely. Students revered their teachers. Society was structured around hierarchies of age and wisdom. Mao destroys this deliberately. He declares that young people, unburdened by old thinking, are more revolutionary, that children, not yet corrupted by bourgeois education, see truth more clearly, that students should judge and struggle against their teachers for teaching old ideas, that children should report their parents for counter-revolutionary thoughts expressed at home. This is psychologically devastating in ways that go beyond politics. This breaks the fundamental bonds that hold society together. When children inform on parents, when students torture teachers, when the young are encouraged to destroy the old, you're not just changing political allegiance, you're severing the transmission of culture itself. You're creating a generation that has no connection to anything before the revolution, that knows only Mao's thought, that has destroyed everyone who could have taught them differently. And Mao does this deliberately, because he knows that the greatest threat to his revolution is not the nationalist government in Taiwan or American imperialism or Soviet revisionism. The greatest threat is Chinese civilization itself. 5,000 years of history, culture, philosophy, tradition, accumulated wisdom. As long as people maintain connection to that civilization, they maintain an alternative framework for understanding the world, an alternative set of values, an alternative source of meaning and identity. So Mao has to destroy it, all of it. And the way to destroy a civilization is not to ban it or censor it. That creates martyrs and underground preservation. The The way to destroy a civilization is to make the people themselves destroy it, voluntarily, enthusiastically, believing they're creating something better. This is what Mao builds through the 1950s and early 1960s, a system of competitive loyalty demonstration, mutual surveillance, public confession, struggle sessions, and youth radicalization. A system where safety requires attacking others, where innocence must be proven through persecution, where loyalty has no maximum and insufficient loyalty is everywhere. And he knows this system needs a focal point, a symbol, something people can carry, wave, quote, treat as sacred scripture that validates every action taken in its name. He needs a Bible for his new religion, a catechism for his revolutionary faith, a pocket-sized manual that reduces all complexity to simple quotations that can justify any atrocity. So in 1964, Lin Biao, Mao's defense minister, compiles selected quotations from Mao's writings and speeches, simple phrases, revolutionary slogans, declarations about class struggle and the need for continuous revolution. Nothing sophisticated, nothing subtle, just pure ideological distillation in bite-sized pieces. The book is small, designed to fit in a shirt pocket. It's printed on thin paper to keep it lightweight. It's bound in red plastic to make it distinctive and weather-resistant. It's cheaply produced so millions of copies can be printed and distributed for free. And in 1966, it's distributed to every person in China. Soldiers get it, workers get it, students get it, party members get it. Eventually, everyone gets it. Over 1 billion copies will be printed over the next decade. It becomes required reading, required memorization, required performance. Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, The Little Red Book. And with this book in hand, Mao is about to unleash the system he's been building for 15 years. He's about to activate the competitive loyalty mechanism on a national scale. He's about to turn every student into a Red Guard, every school into a struggle session, every family into a site of ideological warfare. He's about to launch the Cultural Revolution. 10 years of absolute chaos. 10 years of civilization-destroying madness. 10 years where China tears itself apart in an orgy of revolutionary violence, all in the name of ideological purity, all justified by quotations from the Little Red Book. And by the time it ends, somewhere between 40 and 80 million people will be dead. And 5,000 years of Chinese civilization will be shattered beyond recognition. All because Mao understood something terrifying about human psychology. Give people a way to prove they're better than everyone else, make virtue dependent on attacking others, remove all limits on how far loyalty must go, and humans will destroy anything, including themselves, their families, their civilization, all while believing they're doing good. The Little Red Book didn't create new ideas. It just gave permission. Permission to destroy, permission to accuse, permission to purge, permission to be as vicious as you wanted as long as you could quote Mao while doing it. And that permission was enough to kill tens of millions. Let me show you how. August 18th, 1966. Tiananmen Square. 1 million Red Guards assembled. Most of them teenagers, high school students, university students. The oldest are in their early 20s. The youngest are barely 14. And they're all holding copies of the Little Red Book, waving them in the air like weapons, chanting quotations, ready to destroy China to save it. Mao stands on the rostrum above them, and he gives them permission. To rebel is justified, he proclaims. Bombard the headquarters. He's telling them that authority figures, party officials, school administrators, teachers, even parents, are potentially hiding bourgeois thoughts. That youth must judge their elders. That revolution requires destroying the old to build the new. That they are the vanguard of permanent revolution. And in that moment, Mao unleashes chaos on a scale never before seen. Not war, not planned purges, not systematic terror, but something far more organic and far more total. He unleashes millions of young people armed with the Little Red Book, convinced of their ideological purity, given permission to attack anyone they deem insufficiently revolutionary, with no rules, no limits, no accountability. What happens next destroys China more thoroughly than any foreign invasion could have. Within weeks, schools across China shut down, not because the government closes them, but because Red Guards have taken over. They're struggling against teachers, beating them, forcing them to wear dunce caps and placards declaring their crimes, making them kneel on broken glass, parading them through streets, in some cases killing them. Teachers who taught traditional Chinese literature, class enemies preserving feudal culture, teachers who taught foreign languages, agents of Western imperialism, teachers who maintained discipline, authoritarian oppressors of revolutionary youth, teachers who'd been educated before the revolution, contaminated by bourgeois education. There is no safe position for teachers. Every action, every word, every aspect of their past can be interpreted as evidence of insufficient loyalty to Mao's thought. Bian Zhongyun, the principal of an elite girls' school in Beijing, becomes one of the first victims. On August 5, 1966, her students, including Song Binbin, the girl who renamed Mao, beat her for 5 hours with wooden sticks and brass belt buckles. They force her to carry heavy wooden boards. They pour boiling water on her. She dies from her injuries. She's 50 years old, and her murder is justified by quotations from the Little Red Book about destroying class enemies and old authority. This isn't an isolated incident. This is the pattern that spreads across China. Students turn on teachers, children turn on parents, young people attack the elderly, and all of it is justified by Mao's writings, by quotations from the Little Red Book, proving that destroying the old is revolutionary duty. But it's not just teachers. The Red Guards expand their targets to include the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas, anything traditional, anything historical, anything that predates the communist revolution is now enemy of the people and must be destroyed. They ransack museums, smashing priceless artifacts that had survived thousands of years of Chinese history. They burn books, ancient texts, classical literature, anything not explicitly Maoist. They destroy temples, both Buddhist and Confucian, tearing down statues, burning scriptures, desecrating sacred sites. They attack traditional architecture, painting revolutionary slogans over ancient buildings, destroying decorative elements deemed feudal. They force people to destroy their own family heirlooms, their ancestral records, their traditional clothing. The destruction is staggering. UNESCO estimates that approximately 90% of China's cultural artifacts were destroyed or damaged during the Cultural Revolution. 5,000 years of accumulated civilization, art, literature, philosophy, the world's oldest continuous civilization, systematically destroyed by its own children who believed they were creating paradise. And it gets worse. Because the Red Guards don't just attack teachers and old culture, they attack each other. Different Red Guard factions emerge, each claiming to be more revolutionary than the others, each accusing the others of insufficient loyalty to Mao's thought. They fight in the streets, they occupy buildings and fight pitched battles with improvised weapons. They kidnap rival faction members and subject them to struggle sessions. They kill each other while each side claims to be the true interpreter of the Little Red Book. In some cities, the violence reaches civil war levels. In Guangxi province, Red Guard factions acquire weapons from military arsenals and wage actual warfare against each other. Thousands die. Some accounts describe acts of cannibalism, eating the flesh of class enemies in ritual acts designed to demonstrate revolutionary fervor. These accounts are disputed and impossible to verify fully, but they appear in multiple sources, including government documents. Whether literally true or not, they represent the absolute breakdown of all moral boundaries when ideological purity becomes the only value. Meanwhile, anyone with education, professional expertise, foreign connections, or family background suggesting bourgeois origins becomes a target. Doctors, engineers, scientists, artists, writers, anyone whose skills or knowledge placed them in a position of authority or respect before the Cultural Revolution is now suspect. They're sent to the countryside for re-education through labor, forced to perform agricultural work, subjected to struggle sessions by peasants, made to confess their bourgeois thoughts and pledge loyalty to Mao. Some spend years in these conditions. Some die from overwork, malnutrition, or violence. Some commit suicide to escape the endless humiliation. Liu Shaoqi, the president of China, Mao's second-in-command, becomes the highest-profile victim. Accused of being a capitalist roader trying to restore capitalism, he's placed under house arrest. Red Guards ransack his home. He's denied medical care for diabetes and pneumonia. He dies in November 1969, alone in agony, still technically holding the title of president. This is how complete Mao's system is. Even being second in command of the entire country, provides no protection if someone can accuse you of insufficient ideological purity. Deng Xiaoping, who will later lead China's opening and reform, is purged twice during the Cultural Revolution. His son is thrown from a building by Red Guards and permanently paralyzed, but Deng survives, returning to power after Mao's death. His story is relatively fortunate compared to millions who didn't survive. And throughout all of this chaos, all of this destruction, all of this violence, the Little Red Book is omnipresent. Red Guards wave it during struggle sessions. Victims quote it in their forced confessions. Accusers justify their violence with quotations from it. It's treated like sacred scripture, like magical talisman, like the ultimate authority that validates any action. One of Mao's most frequently quoted passages becomes the justification for all the violence. Revolution is not a dinner party, nor an essay, nor a painting, nor a piece of embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. This quotation is used to justify beating teachers to death, to justify destroying cultural artifacts, to justify turning children into torturers, to justify tearing apart families. Because if revolution requires violence and we are revolutionaries, then our violence proves we're truly revolutionary. The more extreme the violence, the more revolutionary we are. The more we destroy, the more we're building the new world. This is the psychological trap of the Little Red Book. It provides simple quotations that seem to explain everything, that justify anything, that make extreme actions feel not just acceptable, but necessary. And because the quotations are brief and vague, they can be applied to any situation, used to support any action, interpreted in any way that serves the interpreter. The book isn't a detailed political philosophy. It's a weapon precisely because it's vague, precisely because it can mean anything, precisely because anyone can quote it to justify anything, and no one can definitively prove they're wrong because Mao's words are treated as beyond interpretation or questioning. By 1968, the chaos is so extreme that even Mao recognizes it's gone too far. The economy is collapsing. The party itself is barely functioning. The military is the only institution still operating, so Mao sends in the People's Liberation Army to restore order. The Red Guards are disbanded. Many are sent to the countryside permanently. The most violent phase of the Cultural Revolution ends. But the system doesn't end. The struggle sessions continue. The political study sessions continue. The mutual surveillance continues. The Little Red Book remains required reading, required memorization, required performance. The paranoia, the hypervigilance, the constant need to demonstrate loyalty, all of that continues, just slightly less chaotic, slightly more controlled. And the death toll continues rising, because while the mass violence of 1966-1968 was the most visible phase, the Cultural Revolution officially lasted until Mao's death in 1976. 10 years total, 10 years of persecution, struggle sessions, labor camps, forced confessions, destroyed lives. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Official Chinese government estimates, released decades later, acknowledge 1.7 million deaths directly from the Cultural Revolution. But this number includes only confirmed deaths from violence and persecution during the most chaotic years. It doesn't include deaths from famine, disease, suicide, or other indirect causes. It doesn't include the deaths during the Great Leap Forward, which preceded the Cultural Revolution, but was driven by the same Maoist logic. Western scholars estimate the total death toll from Mao's policies, including the Great Leap Forward's famine, the Cultural Revolution, and other campaigns, at between 40 and 80 million people. The exact number may never be known because the Chinese government has never fully disclosed the records, has never completed a comprehensive accounting, has never allowed independent investigation. But we know this: more people died under Mao than under Hitler and Stalin combined. China's population would be significantly larger today if Mao had never been born. An entire generation was traumatized, educated with propaganda instead of real knowledge, turned into ideological warriors who destroyed their own civilization. And all of it, all of the violence, all of the chaos, all of the death, was justified by quotations from a little red book that fit in your pocket. That's the horror of Mao's system. It wasn't imposed entirely from above. It was implemented by millions of people who genuinely believed they were doing good, who genuinely thought they were perfecting China, who genuinely felt that destroying the old world was necessary to build paradise. The Little Red Book gave them permission, gave them justification, gave them simple answers to complex questions, gave them certainty in chaos, gave them purpose through destruction. And that was enough to kill tens of millions and destroy a 5,000-year-old civilization. September 9, 1976, 12:10 a.m., Beijing. Mao Zedong dies at age 82, still the chairman of the Communist Party of China, still wielding absolute power until his final breath. He never faced trial, he never confessed, he never acknowledged the catastrophic suffering his policies caused. He died believing, or at least claiming to believe, that the Cultural Revolution was necessary, that his vision was correct, that the deaths were justified by the revolutionary transformation of Chinese society. Within weeks of his death, the Gang of Four, radical party leaders including Mao's widow Jiang Qing, who had been primary enforcers of Cultural Revolution policies, are arrested. The Chinese Communist Party needs scapegoats. They need to acknowledge something went wrong while protecting the party's legitimacy and Mao's legacy. So they blame the Gang of Four for excesses, for misinterpreting Mao's intentions, for going too far in implementing policies that were theoretically correct. This is how authoritarian systems maintain legitimacy after catastrophe. Blame the implementation, not the policy. Blame individuals, not the system. Blame excess, not intent. Acknowledge enough wrong to seem reasonable while protecting the core ideology that caused the disaster. The trial of the Gang of Four in 1980-1981 is partially televised, a public spectacle designed to provide closure and signal new leadership direction. Jiang Qing is defiant, shouting that she was following Mao's orders, that everything she did was implementing his directives, that attacking her is attacking Mao himself. She's right, but that's not a defense the party can accept. She's sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. She commits suicide in 1991. Meanwhile, Deng Xiaoping rises to power. He survived the Cultural Revolution, barely. His son is permanently disabled from Red Guard violence. He understands personally the cost of Mao's policies, but he also understands he can't completely repudiate Mao without delegitimizing the Communist Party itself, which bases its authority on the revolution Mao led. So Deng navigates a careful political balance. He declares Mao was 70% correct and 30% wrong. The revolution, the party's founding, the victory over the nationalists, these were Mao's great achievements. The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, the personality cult. These were Mao's errors. This formula allows the party to acknowledge mistakes while maintaining that the system itself is legitimate, that the party remains the rightful ruler of China. Under Deng's leadership, China begins opening economically. The communes are dissolved, market reforms are introduced, foreign investment is welcomed. China begins the economic transformation that will eventually make it the world's second-largest economy. This is presented as returning to Mao's true vision while correcting the errors of the Cultural Revolution. But the political system, the Communist Party's monopoly on power, the censorship, the surveillance, the inability to criticize party leadership, none of that changes. If anything, it becomes more sophisticated. The Little Red Book is no longer required memorization. The political study sessions become less frequent and less intense. The struggle sessions end. The worst excesses of Maoist totalitarianism are abandoned. But the underlying architecture of control, the party's absolute authority, the surveillance of citizens, the punishment of dissent, the requirement of ideological conformity, all of that remains, just modernized, refined, made less visible, and more efficient. Let's talk about what we know about the death toll, because even decades later, the full accounting remains uncertain, deliberately obscured by a government that has never fully disclosed the records and actively suppresses investigation. The Great Leap Forward, 1958-1962, Mao's attempt to rapidly industrialize China through forced collectivization and backyard steel furnaces. The result was the largest famine in human history. Conservative estimates, 15 to 30 million dead from starvation. More recent scholarship, based on leaked Chinese government documents, 45 million dead. This wasn't natural disaster. This was policy-induced famine. Officials who reported accurate grain production were accused of rightist thinking and purged, so officials reported inflated numbers. The government, believing the false reports, confiscated grain that didn't exist. People starved while grain was exported to prove China's success. When peasants tried to flee, they were stopped at checkpoints. When they tried to forage for food, they were punished for stealing collective property. They starved to death while following orders, while demonstrating loyalty, while quoting Mao's writings about the glorious leap forward. The Cultural Revolution, 1966-1976, official Chinese government accounting released decades later admits to 1.7 million dead from direct violence and persecution. But this number is deliberately conservative, counting only confirmed deaths during peak chaos. Independent scholars estimate 7 to 10 million dead from violence, persecution, suicide, and indirect causes during the Cultural Revolution specifically. Add the broader death toll from labor camps, forced relocations, destroyed medical infrastructure, and other systemic effects. The numbers climb higher. Other campaigns and purges. The anti-rightist campaign of 1957-1959, the suppression of counter-revolutionaries in the early 1950s, various smaller purges and campaigns, each added thousands or millions to the death toll. Total accounting from all Maoist policies combined, Western scholars generally estimate 40-80 million excess deaths during Mao's rule. The most commonly cited figure is approximately 45 million, though some researchers argue for numbers as high as 80 million. The exact total will never be known because complete records don't exist, were never compiled, or remain locked in Chinese government archives. To put this in perspective, this is more than every person who died in World War II from all causes, all countries combined. This is more than the Holocaust, the Soviet gulags, and all Nazi killing combined. This is more deaths than any other political leader in human history has caused, and it happened not through gas chambers or firing squads primarily, though there was violence. It happened through policy, through ideology, through a system that made people destroy themselves and each other while believing they were building paradise. And here's the crucial question. How does this happen? How does a nation of nearly 1 billion people allow this? Why didn't they rebel? Why didn't they resist? Why didn't the military coup, the party members revolt? The people rise up. Because of the system Mao built. Because of the Little Red Book and everything it represented. Because resistance was impossible when everyone was watching everyone else. Because you couldn't organize rebellion when you couldn't trust anyone, when your own children might report you, when any conversation could be twisted into evidence of counter-revolutionary thinking. Because the system made everyone complicit. Everyone had attended struggle sessions, as victims or as participants. Everyone had denounced someone. Everyone had quoted the Little Red Book to justify something they might otherwise have questioned. Everyone had blood on their hands or knew they could have blood on their hands at any moment. There was no pure position from which to resist. There was no innocent group that could organize without being infiltrated and destroyed by the mutual surveillance system. And because many people genuinely believed, they believed the famine was caused by natural disasters and sabotage, not policy. They believed the violence was necessary to root out class enemies. They believed Mao's vision of permanent revolution, continuous struggle against bourgeois elements, the need to destroy the old world to build the new. The Little Red Book told them this. Their study sessions reinforced it. The struggle sessions proved it by finding enemies everywhere. The system was self-confirming. If you questioned it, that proved you were an enemy, which proved the system was right to suspect everyone. This is the true genius and true horror of Mao's method. It wasn't just totalitarianism, it was totalitarianism that made the victims enforce their own oppression, that made the population participate in their own destruction, that convinced people they were building utopia while creating hell. After Mao's death, as the full scale of the catastrophe became undeniable, as families counted their dead, as the economic devastation became visible, as the destroyed cultural heritage couldn't be ignored, China faced a reckoning, but not a full reckoning, not a truth and reconciliation process, not a Nuremberg trial, not a comprehensive accounting and apology and systemic reform. Instead, a carefully managed acknowledgement. Mao was 70% right, the Gang of Four was blamed, some mistakes were admitted, economic reforms were implemented, but the party remained in power, the system remained, the surveillance remained, the censorship remained, the inability to organize opposition remained, the fundamental architecture of control that Mao built, that remained operational, just modernized. And here's what should terrify you. China studied what worked and what didn't. They learned from Mao's excesses. They learned that chaos is inefficient, that famine destroys productivity, that visible violence generates international criticism. So they refined the system, made it more efficient, made it less visible, made it sustainable. The Little Red Book is no longer required, but social credit scores are. Mao's study sessions have been replaced by algorithmic surveillance. Struggle sessions have been replaced by disappearances and re-education camps. The Red Guards have been replaced by sophisticated internal security apparatus and AI-powered monitoring. The competitive loyalty demonstrations have been replaced by quantified social credit, where your ideological conformity is measured, scored, and enforced through access to services, jobs, travel, education. Mao's system didn't fail. It evolved. It's still operational. It's more sophisticated now, more technological, more efficient, less chaotic, but no less total in its control. And it's not just operating in China. Elements of Mao's psychological architecture, competitive virtue demonstration, peer-to-peer surveillance, platform-mediated enforcement of ideological conformity, the weaponization of youth against tradition, the destruction of nuance in favor of simple ideological purity tests, these patterns are spreading globally, often without people recognizing their origin. The Little Red Book killed 45 million people, but the psychological weapons it contained, those are immortal. And they're being deployed right now in ways that would make Mao proud. Let me show you where. 2018, Xinjiang Province, Western China. Over 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been detained in what the Chinese government calls vocational training centers and what the rest of the world recognizes as concentration camps. Inside these facilities, detainees are forced to attend political education sessions. They memorize Communist Party doctrine, they're forced to renounce their religion, they're taught Mandarin, they're subjected to psychological torture designed to break their identity and rebuild them as ideologically compliant citizens. This is Mao's re-education system, perfected. The struggle sessions of the Cultural Revolution, systematized and industrialized. The Little Red Book's forced memorization, updated with modern party doctrine and enforced through technological surveillance. But here's what makes it more insidious than Mao's original: the surveillance that enables it. Throughout Xinjiang, facial recognition cameras track every movement. AI analyzes behavior patterns. Phones are regularly inspected for forbidden content. Social connections are mapped. Religious practice is monitored. Everything is quantified, analyzed, flagged. The system identifies who needs re-education before they even recognize their targets. This is what Mao couldn't achieve: perfect, total, preemptive surveillance. Mao had to rely on people reporting each other. Modern China has that plus AI, facial recognition, smartphone monitoring, big data analytics. Mao's mutual surveillance system upgraded with technology that would have seemed like science fiction in 1966. And it's not just Xinjiang. Across China, the social credit system is being implemented, a comprehensive surveillance and scoring system that tracks your behavior, your purchases, your social connections, your online activity, your expressions of loyalty to the party. Your score determines your access to jobs, travel, loans, education. Low scores get you punished. High scores get you rewarded. And the criteria for high scores include, among other things, demonstrating correct political thinking, reporting violations by others, consuming approved content, expressing loyalty to the party. Does this sound familiar? It should. Because it's Mao's system. The competitive loyalty demonstration, the mutual surveillance, the quantification of ideological purity, the reward for reporting others, the punishment for insufficient conformity. All the psychological mechanisms of the Cultural Revolution, just automated, algorithmically enforced, presented as neutral technology rather than political control. Let me be very specific about how this works and how it echoes Mao's Little Red Book system. Mechanism 1. Quantified loyalty. During the Cultural Revolution, there was no objective measure of sufficient revolutionary consciousness. You could always be accused of insufficient loyalty, no matter how much you demonstrated. The anxiety of never being pure enough drove the competitive destruction. Social credit does the same thing, but makes it visible. Your score can always be higher. You can always demonstrate more loyalty. You can always report more violations. You can always consume more approved content and less unapproved content. The score is transparent, but the algorithm that determines it is opaque. You know you're being measured, but you don't know exactly how. which creates the same hypervigilance, the same constant performance of loyalty, the same anxiety that drove the Red Guards. Mechanism 2. Automated mutual surveillance. Mao forced people to report each other through social pressure and fear. You had to report violations or be suspected of protecting enemies. Modern China does this through platforms. Report your neighbor for violations through an app. Report social media posts that express unapproved opinions. Report businesses that break regulations. All of it quantified, all of it contributing to social credit scores, both the reporters, rewarded for vigilance, and the reported, punished for violation. The psychology is identical to Cultural Revolution mutual surveillance. The only difference is efficiency. Mao's system required physical struggle sessions and face-to-face accusations. Modern system requires only a smartphone and an app. But the result is the same. Everyone watches everyone. Trust is impossible. The only safety is in reporting others. Mechanism 3. Ideological re-education through technology. The Little Red Book was required reading, required memorization, required constant reference. Modern China uses apps that require daily engagement with party doctrine. Study the Great Nation is a mandatory app for party members and increasingly for citizens generally. It contains party speeches, propaganda, Xi Jinping's writings. Users must log in daily, read content, take quizzes, accumulate points. Failure to engage lowers your social credit score. This is digital Little Red Book. Same function, constant ideological reinforcement through required engagement, but more effective because it's personalized, trackable, and directly tied to your access to services and opportunities. Mechanism 4. Weaponized youth through digital platforms. Mao mobilized youth as red gods to attack traditional authority. Modern China mobilizes youth through social media to attack ideological deviance. The Little Pink, young nationalist Chinese internet users who attack critics of China, who dox dissidents, who flood social media with pro-party content, who report violations, who celebrate party achievements. Many of them are genuine believers, raised in post-Mao China's prosperity, educated in party-controlled schools, consuming party-controlled media, genuinely convinced that China is perfecting governance and that criticism is Western imperialism trying to contain China's rise. They're not paid propaganda workers, though those exist too. They're volunteers, enthusiastic enforcers, digital red guards. The psychology is identical to the Cultural Revolution's elevation of youth, young people convinced of their ideological purity, attacking elders and traditions and anyone who questions the party. Just now it happens on Twitter and YouTube instead of in struggle sessions. But the mechanism, young zealots as primary enforcers of ideological conformity, is pure Mao. Mechanism 5. Destruction of dissent through isolation. During the Cultural Revolution, anyone accused of insufficient loyalty was isolated, struggled against publicly, cut off from family and community, made an example. Modern China does this through digital erasure. Dissidents are removed from social media. Their social credit scores are destroyed. They can't travel. They can't work in many fields. They're digitally unpersoned. But more sophisticated than Mao's physical isolation, the algorithm ensures most people never see the dissent in the first place. Content is filtered. VPNs are blocked. International internet is controlled through the Great Firewall. So most Chinese citizens aren't even exposed to criticism of the party. They don't have to consciously ignore dissent or suppress their own doubts. They simply never encounter the ideas that might create doubt. This is what Mao wanted but couldn't fully achieve. Complete control over information environment. Mao had propaganda everywhere, but people still had memories of pre-revolution China, still had access to traditional culture, still could imagine alternatives. Modern China controls the information environment so thoroughly that many young Chinese people genuinely can't imagine alternatives to party rule, genuinely believe Western criticism is propaganda, genuinely think China's system is superior. Now I need to be very clear about something. I'm not saying modern China is identical to Cultural Revolution China. It's not. Chinese citizens today have economic freedoms and personal autonomy that didn't exist under Mao. They can start businesses, travel internationally, consume entertainment, live private lives in ways that were impossible during the Cultural Revolution. The party has learned that providing prosperity and personal freedom, within limits, is more sustainable than total mobilization and chaos. But the political control mechanisms, the surveillance, the ideological enforcement, the punishment of dissent, the requirement of public loyalty, the inability to organize opposition, the party's absolute monopoly on power, those haven't just continued. They've been perfected through technology that Mao could only dream of. And here's what should disturb you. Elements of this system are spreading beyond China, not because countries are copying China deliberately, though some authoritarian regimes are, but because the psychological mechanisms Mao discovered are effective, and modern technology makes them easier to implement. Let me show you where you can see Mao's patterns emerging in democracies. Social media as mutual surveillance. Platforms where users report each other for violations of community standards, where saying the wrong thing gets you mobbed, where expressing unpopular opinions can cost you your job, where everyone performs ideological conformity because dissent is punished through platform dynamics and social consequences. This isn't government surveillance like China's social credit, but the psychological mechanism, everyone watching everyone, reporting violations, performing loyalty, is structurally similar to Mao's mutual surveillance. Algorithmic enforcement of conformity, platforms that amplify content, the algorithm determines is engaging, which often means emotionally extreme, while suppressing content deemed problematic. Users don't choose what they see based on interest. Algorithms curate information environment to maximize engagement, which creates echo chambers, which creates ideological bubbles, where dissent from group consensus becomes invisible or appears as outrageous extremism. This creates the same epistemic closure Mao wanted, environments where people can't encounter ideas that challenge their ideological framework because the algorithm filters them out. Competitive virtue demonstration. Online dynamics where people compete to demonstrate ideological purity, where someone can always accuse you of insufficient commitment to the cause, where the only defense against being called out is to call out someone else first, where loyalty is demonstrated through attacking others for insufficient loyalty. This is Mao's competitive loyalty mechanism, just operating through social media dynamics rather than government policy. Youth radicalization against tradition. Generational conflicts where young people, convinced of their moral superiority on social issues, attack older generations and traditional institutions as irredeemably corrupt or backward. This isn't identical to Red Guards attacking teachers. The content is different. The violence is rhetorical rather than physical. But the pattern of young people mobilized to attack traditional authority in the name of ideological purity, that's structurally similar to Mao's weaponization of youth. Ideological purity testing, environments where there's no maximum loyalty, only insufficient loyalty, where no matter what you've done to support the cause, someone can always accuse you of not doing enough, of having said something problematic in the past, of not being pure enough, where the only safety is in attacking others before they attack you. This is Mao's infinite loyalty requirement, creating the same anxiety, the same hypervigilance, the same competitive destruction. Now, I'm not claiming that any of these Western phenomena are equivalent to Mao's Cultural Revolution. They're not. No one is being beaten to death. No one is being sent to labor camps. No one's children are being encouraged to report them to secret police. The scale, the severity, the consequences, all completely different. But the psychological mechanisms, those are eerily similar. The patterns Mao discovered and exploited, competitive loyalty demonstration, mutual surveillance creating isolation and distrust, algorithmic information control, weaponized youth, infinite purity requirements. Those patterns emerge naturally in certain social and technological environments, even without authoritarian government implementing them. And that's what makes Mao's legacy so dangerous and so relevant. Because the Little Red Book is no longer required reading, but the psychological architecture it represented that's embedded in systems and platforms and social dynamics that billions of people interact with every day. Mao discovered that you don't need secret police if you make everyone police each other. You don't need propaganda if you control the information environment completely. You don't need to impose loyalty if you make loyalty competitive. You don't need to silence dissent if you make dissent psychologically impossible through isolation and algorithmic filtering. These insights didn't die with Mao. They evolved. They're operational in China's sophisticated authoritarian system, and they're emerging in modified forms in democratic societies through social media dynamics, algorithmic curation, and online mob behavior. The Little Red Book is obsolete. But the psychological weapons it represented are more powerful than ever, because now they're embedded in technologies and platforms that billions of people use voluntarily, that seem neutral rather than political, that operate through apparent choice rather than obvious force. Mao killed 45 million people using a pocket-sized book and the psychological mechanisms of competitive loyalty. Modern authoritarians and modern technologies have access to far more sophisticated tools for implementing the same psychological mechanisms. The question is, will we recognize these patterns? Will we consciously resist competitive virtue spirals? Will we maintain our ability to trust each other despite surveillance? Will we seek out information that challenges our beliefs despite algorithmic filtering? Will we refuse to participate in ideological purity competitions even when participation seems like the only safe option? Because those choices, recognition, resistance, trust, intellectual diversity, refusal to participate, those are the only defenses against Mao's psychological architecture. Not because we face identical circumstances, but because the human psychology Mao exploited hasn't changed. The vulnerabilities he identified, our need for belonging, our fear of isolation, our desire to demonstrate virtue, our tendency toward tribalism, our comfort with simple answers, those are permanent features of human nature. Mao's Little Red Book killed tens of millions by exploiting those vulnerabilities through technology available in the 1960s. Imagine what can be done with those same psychological insights combined with artificial intelligence, ubiquitous surveillance, and platforms that mediate most human communication. Actually, you don't have to imagine. It's happening. In China, openly and systematically. In democracies, more subtly and through corporate rather than government control, but following similar psychological patterns. Mao is dead. The Little Red Book is obsolete. But the ghost in the machine, the psychological architecture of competitive loyalty, mutual surveillance, algorithmic control, and enforced ideological conformity, that's very much alive. And the only way to resist it is to see it clearly, understand how it works, and consciously refuse to participate even when participation seems safe and resistance seems dangerous. That's the lesson of Mao's Little Red Book. That's the warning for today. That's the choice you face every time you open social media, every time you're tempted to report someone for wrongthink, every time you perform loyalty to avoid being targeted, every time you stay silent rather than express an unpopular truth. Mao proved that you can convince 1 billion people to destroy their own civilization if you give them the right psychological tools and social mechanisms. The tools have changed, the mechanisms have evolved, but the vulnerability remains. The question is, will you recognize it? Will you resist it? Will you maintain your humanity and your ability to think independently even when systems are designed to make independence impossible? Everything depends on your answer. Everything depends on enough people choosing to see clearly, think independently, and refuse to participate in systems, whether government or corporate, whether obvious or subtle, that exploit the same psychological vulnerabilities Mao weaponized with his Little Red Book. The body count from Mao's experiment is final, 45 million minimum, possibly twice that. The body count from modern implementations of the same psychological architecture is still accumulating. In Xinjiang's camps, in the lives destroyed by social credit systems, in the dissidents who disappear, in the freedom that's eroded piece by piece in the name of stability and harmony and protecting people from dangerous ideas. And potentially, if these patterns continue spreading, in the democracies that sacrifice freedom for safety, truth for comfort, independent thought for algorithmic curation, human connection for monitored interaction. Mao's Little Red Book was a murder weapon that killed tens of millions. The modern versions are more sophisticated, more technological, more subtle, but they're based on the same psychological insights, exploit the same human vulnerabilities, and lead toward the same destination: total control over thought itself. The only question is whether enough people will recognize the pattern and refuse to follow it before it's too late. That's the choice. That's always the choice. And it's a choice you make every day, in every interaction, in every decision, about whether to conform or dissent, whether to report or protect, whether to think independently or let algorithms think for you. Choose wisely. Mao's victims didn't get a choice. You still do. For now.